Hello, ladies and gentlewomen. Welcome back. This is going to be my first new episode of the podcast after a very long break. Appreciate the patience. This interview I did is with a woman named Jessi. She lives in Oregon. She owns Lesbian land. We're going to be having a discussion about women's land, lesbian land, and the history there, what that means. And so I hope you enjoy the interview. So welcome, Jess.
Hello, everyone, and you'll have to excuse me. My dogs are being distracted by squirrels out the window.
That's okay. That's all good. I hear their little tippy tap feet.
Oh, yeah. They're attached to 100-pound bodies, though, so
Oh my.
yeah.
So
Okay,
so
let's
Jess,
go.
go ahead and introduce yourself just kind of, briefly to our audience so they get to know what you're about.
My name's Jessi, and I'm 69 years old, and I have been out of the closet as a lesbian since 1976. I had just turned 21. My oldest daughter had just been born, and that's I've just always been a lesbian. That's just who I am. And when I let's see, in my latter 20s, I started homesteading in Alaska with my very first partner, and we lived on about 140 acres at one point. But what we were doing was living off the land. We had no electricity. We had no running water. We did all of that by hand. We were school bus drivers. We had, four-wheel drive vehicles to get us in and out. And I had a sled dog team. And all these things that we were doing were subsistence living, I think is a good word for it. We were still attached to the city because we had jobs and we had, family that lived in town and friends that lived in town. But what we were doing would be considered, and I did not know this at the time, we would have been considered land dykes. And that is a term that's been used in the lesbian land culture forever, just about. Not forever, but for as long as the whole concept has been around. So
Okay, so what is lesbian land?
very specifically using those words, and from my interpretation alone, lesbian land is first a concept and was originally started as a survival technique from lesbian separatists moving back onto the land back in the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, mostly in the 70s, though.
Mm-hmm.
And so lesbian land is, in a nutshell, land that is owned by lesbians.
Okay.
And lesbian land started, it was this is my interpretation, started as a concept of separation because lesbian separatists started this movement for the most part. And
Okay.
this movement started as the official title was the Back to the Land movement. And in Oregon, it was also kind of coupled with the hippie commune movement because lots of corporate America was moving out into the woods too,
Mm-hmm.
but not together. For the most part, lesbians back then were looking for land away from everything, which is logical, and they were running into the fact that back then women didn't make a lot of money, and some of them were old enough that they remember not being able to even sign a check or have a
Yeah.
book. Um,
When you said they wanted to go have lesbian land, which was logical. Why was that logical? What was the kind of purpose there?
it was framed as an intentional community setting
Mm-hmm.
where women of all lesbians of all cuts of cloth could get together and use their hands and be intuitive and inventive have control over their surroundings, control over their money, control over their lives. And a lot of the women that were part of the original movement were women that were running away from um, heterosexual marriages, and they were trying
Hmm.
to make a break of it. They were trying to be independent of what some women would understand as the patriarchy.
Yeah.
But the patriarchy really included all kinds of other things like arts and businesses, independent business, independent ways of thinking, and being able to learn new skills to build a house, for instance.
So in the research I've done and the reading I've done about these lands, it really seemed like it was very much an empowerment kind of
Cool.
movement, you know? It
Mhm.
was giving women um independence, and like you
Yes.
mentioned, teaching them how to take care of themselves and,
Mhm.
do a lot of the things that society said only men could do.
Right.
And yeah, it's I really encourage people to, go and read some stuff, and I'll link things that you can read and even videos you can watch about the history of this because it's fascinating and brilliant and just awesome.
Right. Yeah, and it's a concept that has been disappearing slowly. I uh, plugged into the land that Debbie and I are on now, um, kind of in a indirect roundabout way, because back when I was homesteading in Alaska, in my late 20s, I was reading what would be considered underground lesbian periodicals, that I could get my hands on, and in this periodical in particular, there were stories about women who were living on the land, lesbians who were living on the land, and putting in gardens or building a fence or building a cabin, and how they had to um, survive basically on land that was worth pretty much nothing to anybody else, and that's how they got it so cheap. But lesbian lands were originally purchased by lesbians,
Hmm.
and in a lot of cases the land that was being purchased was land that wasn't worth anything to anyone else.
Yeah, yeah, that's important to state here is, the fact they got these lands because no one else kind of wanted it. Like
Right.
it was rough, but that's what you had to do, especially during that time.
Yeah, my land in particular is in a canyon. There there's nothing flat, there's nothing level about my land. We have to make those level and flat spaces.
No, do you mind saying where your land is?
I live on lesbian land in Southern Oregon.
Okay. There's a lot of the lesbian lands and women's lands in particular, they are all kind of interconnected too, right? Like you all know
Yes,
about each other and communicate and
yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, we have an online newsletter that goes out once a month that anybody, all the women that have subscribed to it, get a monthly newsletter, and it's also a way for women to advertise furniture for sale, or like a concert coming up, or a death of a member in the community, and a memorial that might be happening, just whatever.
mhm.
So it started out in, I think, 93 as a handmade newsletter, and it was typed and it was sent out by hand. You put a stamp on it, all these things. And the woman that originally started that, um, eventually moved it online, and my partner Debbie is helping her manage that right now, because we're the next, in essence, the next generation for this. But yeah, we have a way of communicating with each other, and it's modern in the fact that it's online. um, there's Everybody has an email now. I
Yes,
mean,
yes they do.
yeah, there really wasn't a way to, as far as I understand, because I wasn't down here when it was happening. I was on my own land doing my own thing, and there was 6 of us. but we didn't know we were land dykes. We just were living in the woods and driving school buses for a living, right? But down here, it was an entire community.
Yeah.
And these communities were considered a lot of women used. Now I'm saying women specifically to the women that live down here. A lot of the women came here and considered themselves uh, a part of an intentional community,
Okay.
which would be a commune. And these, a few of the lands started out that way. My land started out that way in a sort of roundabout way. There were several women living here back in the 70s. And um, I have 80 acres. 60 of those acres were lived on by gay men for a long time. And then when they moved back into the city, they sold their land to the lesbians who lived on the other 20. And so now my land is a combination of those two pieces. But it was a gay and lesbian commune at one point, and
Hmm.
it's not now. Debbie and I are private owners of this land now, but part of our paperwork, our contract, if you will, is that this land will never be owned by anyone but lesbians for now, from here to forever.
Hmm.
It was set in our contract that way. And when we are gone, um, our land will be bequeathed, is the word, to the Oregon Women's Land Trust, which is kind of an umbrella uh, entity that it kind of safeguards all the lands in our neck of the woods down here. Oregon was kind of the original spot that
Hmm.
when the back to the land movement kind of started in. And so there's a large concentration of lands down here. And most of them that I am familiar with are privately owned now.
Okay.
But a lot of them started out as intentional communities where a bunch of women got together and they tried to make a go of it together.
Yeah.
And
But even though they are privately owned, it sounds like there's still kind of a community agreement and kind of a contract about what these lands can be used for or where they go, right?
yeah, and each woman who owns the land or lives on the land, they come up with their own rules. I mean, it the rules themselves are, based on what the women on that land will agree to.
Mhm.
Um, but in the beginning, and I'm going on what I understand, not, I'm trying not to speak for anybody else because that's not my place.
Mhm.
In the beginning, because of the ideals of the separatist lesbian community as a whole, it was a matter of community and support and taking care of each other. And back in the 70s, of course, there was no internet, so it was really hard to stay in touch. So they had to kind of stay in touch on each other's lands, come to a festival, do a camp out, have a winter burn of, underbrush, which was it's a big ritual that.
How did you come to get your land? Basically.
Okay. So when I left Alaska, I moved to Oregon, but I moved into the city
Mhm.
because I didn't know it, but I was a land dyke. It wasn't the same concept as it is down here, but I was doing the same thing in a different area. But when I moved, I separated from my partner at the time. I moved to the city. I lived in Seattle and Portland for a very long time. And fast forward to 2019, I went to Torrance, California for um, a phlebotomy conference because I was actually a phlebotomist at the time. And I went down for some training and spent 3 weeks in Torrance. And I needed to hook up with my community. I
Mhm.
mean, I was in the middle of Torrance and I didn't know anybody. So I looked up the closest LGBT center and there was one there in Compton. And strip mall. So I went there, and most gay community centers have a table where there's brochures and so on and so forth. Anybody that's been to a community center knows that there's brochures and pamphlets and information about various things. And for the very first time in many, many years, I saw this publication that I had originally gotten my hands on back in the 70s. I hadn't seen one for years. And I picked it up because there was a cow on the front, and because I hadn't seen this particular periodical for decades, and I thought, "Wow, this is cool." Way down here, I finally found one. So I took it with me to my Airbnb, and I sat down that evening, and I was thumbing through the pages, and I flipped through it, and there was a section in there where they just have general information. And in this section, there was a big ad saying, uh, Cabbage Lane has come to a crossroads. And I went, "Oh, what's this?" And I started reading, and it's an advertisement for this land, and that the women that owned it had to make a decision. They were living in Portland, and they had, they still own the land, and the land itself had a land trust board that got together, and they made decisions about the land, and they paid the taxes, and they, had barbecues and campouts on the land every so often, and everybody got together, and so there was a board, a land trust board that monitored this land. But the women that originally owned the land, they were ready to pass it on to the next generation. And it absolutely had to go to lesbians.
Mhm.
That was their intention, was to pass it on to lesbians, preferably a couple, they said, and that's good because we were. But they wanted to pass it on to another lesbian, someone who would commit themselves to the land and stay on the property and be part of the community and carry on the traditions of what had originally been started in the 70s. And I communicated with them. We spent probably about a year making negotiations, and we finally got the keys in April of 2020, keys to the gate.
Yeah.
And we've been here ever since.
Very cool. So you talked quite a few times about passing it on and the next generation.
Mhm.
So where does lesbian land stand now? Because as I've understood it and as I've seen from talking to you and reading and other women, most of the women who are stewarding this land or own the land are pretty old by now. They're up there, and
Yeah.
who's coming in to take their place? You know,
Well, that's the struggle right now. I mean, it's not such a bad struggle, but it's a struggle nonetheless, because it's a piece of lesbian history, lesbian cultural history that um, has kind of served its purpose, and the newer generation are living in the cities, and lesbian culture is kind of different anymore.
yeah.
And the younger lesbians, the women that would be in their 20s and 30s, who could come back to the land and start fresh and want to live in the woods and want to play, do things with their hands and have a campfire and do whatever, they're not necessarily interested in that anymore. And like you said, the women that own the lands are all in their latter part of their decades, and a lot of them are in their 80s at this point.
Yeah.
My friends, um, and the significance here is that they started out in their 20s, bought their land, and spent their entire lives here.
Mhm.
Okay, and the women that owned my land, that's where they were at when they put this ad in the periodical. And so they're passing it on. They pass it on to the next generation, would be Debbie and myself, because we're in our 60s.
Mhm.
Well, I'll be 70 here my next birthday, but I'm still the next generation. And
Yeah.
so our next generation would be the younger 20-year-old lesbians who would be interested in living in the woods and building a cabin or whatever, working with their hands, being independent, all the original ideas. The biggest difference is way back then, there was no email, there was no internet, there was no, there was no infrastructure, but there is now. And that's
It
what
seems like you're skipping a few generations. You're skipping a generation here though.
I know
You
that.
got you got me, who's in the 40s, right? So you got
Mhm.
women in their 50s and 40s and late 30s.
Right.
You just skipped right over that generation.
Yeah. Well, come on down, you know? The problem is, and the difficulty that is what everyone is facing right now, is that there's not an awful lot of women that are interested anymore,
Yeah. And
you know?
you can kind of see that, lesbian land was a product of the times, right? It was almost a
Mhm.
necessity.
Yep,
But with gay rights, one to the extent it has been, and homosexuality for the most part, we're able to live our lives.
mhm,
We can live in what kind of whatever community we choose now. We
sure.
don't have, we can have jobs and for the most part be out in the Western world.
Absolutely.
And so you can understand why would I go to the land? Why would I make my life harder by having to
Well, exactly.
No, I mean,
And
you can see. Also, our generation has been able to have children and raise families, which would have, have families, which would have been harder for women
okay.
of the
Mhm.
past generation.
And the past generation, myself being part of that past generation, we were subjected to um, laws or the lack of laws protecting us from ex-husbands and the
Yeah,
court.
yeah.
And a lot of the women that showed up on the West Coast, and it's kind of been a migration, but the West Coast was kind of the hotbed at the time. And the women migrating here were trying to get away from a divorce and a husband that wanted to take their kids. And so lesbian land was a way to get away. I mean, and most of the time it was a safety zone. That's where women went to be safe and amongst their women of the same situation. There were a lot of women back then that they were in college, okay, or they made us they so one summer in between semesters they got in a Volkswagen van and drove to the West Coast and
Mhm.
found lesbian land and stayed. And as a matter of fact, Eugene is a hotbed of just that kind of documentation and history. There were an awful lot of women that ended up in Eugene, which is north of us, and they
Mhm.
were all what made basically made the lesbian community in Eugene, which is a college town. So there was a lot of combinations of things going on and politics and the ERA and the gay rights movement and all the things that were going on back then um, brought the women in, brought the women in from marriages they were trying to get away from and leaving the city just to get out of the city. And then they took a summer vacation in their Volkswagen and ended up in Eugene with a
So
whole bunch of other lesbians.
yeah, so even though you know times have changed and
Mhm.
lesbians can live their lives more out in the open, um, I still think lesbian land's important. I still think
Absolutely.
lesbian only spaces are important, right? And
Absolutely.
so, but I kind of want your take. Why do you think this lesbian land is important for the next generation? What can they get out of coming to the land or being part of this kind of community?
Well, my take on all of that, uh, my piece of land, it's kind of the golden child. That's kind of a weird term to use, but all the women that I am friends with they've lived on their lands from the time they were younger and they went into the woods. they have built their homes, they have their gardens, they have their orchards, they have their roads have been improved, and they have all the modern amenities. All they've been working on that for decades, and my land has been kind of left out on the wayside because it's so primitive. So we're kind of starting from scratch on our land. But to use an example of what you just asked, there is another piece of land that is lesbian owned in just east of Portland. A really big piece of land that just celebrated their 50th anniversary. And it's built on having those younger women out there.
Mhm.
There is a group of younger women that go out there on a regular basis and they help the older generation rebuild an old building, or they put in hot and cold running showers out there in a big shed, and they cultivate a garden and they learn these skills. Our land isn't ready for that yet, but that's the ideal.
Mhm.
And
So, that's an important point 'cause, the lands you don't need to if you're a lesbian and you wanna participate and you wanna go to the land, um, you don't need to buy some land. You don't need to move there either. You can go like, the lands
Mhm.
allow lesbians to come and camp, stay, visit, help,
Right, right,
right? I mean,
right.
that's kinda part of the thing is it's open to lesbians to come and
Yes,
be there.
and participate.
Yeah.
And that's where my land comes in, because we're trying to recreate the buildings out here and build new ones. We have a reservoir that we're putting together so that we have our own water source. Our land in its history had seasonal water. There was hardly, I mean, people had to bring their own water in, and we did for a couple of different years when we first moved on. But now we have a water source that we put in an entire water system that is gravity fed, and our water line is in the middle of a spring 2,000 feet up in the mountain. It's not public toilets. We have an outhouse, but we invite women in during the summer, spring, summer, to come in and camp. We have
Mhm.
spaces for people to camp and stay with us for as long as they would like, and as long as it's weather permitting and so on. But while they're there, they help us build these buildings and put in the fences and create the trails or cut the uh, we had a harvest thinning project a couple of years ago, and we're still cleaning up all the deadfall from the trees that were uh, um, kind of victims of the whole thing, but turning it into firewood for the wood stoves. We Debbie and I still have a giant goal of rebuilding the main cabin that's on this land. So the women that come to our lands come to camp and help. Most
Do they have to help?
No.
Okay. I just wanna make that clear.
Mhm.
If you just wanna camp,
Yeah.
you don't have to, but honestly, I would do something.
Right. I
I
mean,
would do something.
right. And if that's what I don't want to use marketing, but if we're advertising as a land where we're still working on the infrastructure, it's primitive. We have this giant hole in the ground that we want to turn into a reservoir, and we need people out here to lay the pond liner so that we can start filling it with water. And rarely have we had anyone just sit around and watch.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
that's just that, how can you not jump in and help, try to help?
So, I don't know if you really answered my question. What do you
I'm
think
trying.
well, I know. What do you think that the younger generation can gain by coming to these lands, even if it's just to visit?
That
I'll tell you what I think.
okay.
I think they can gain a lot because it makes you touch grass,
Yeah, there's that.
right?
Yes, yes,
I
yes.
mean, I'm just as much maybe not as much 'cause I didn't grow up with technology like they have, but my goodness, the internet can be good, but it can be a damn curse too.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
And if you don't get outside and you don't just sit under a tree for a
Breathe it
while,
in. Yep.
if you don't use your hands and build something or make something, I
Mhm.
mean, that feeds your soul. There is something that feeds a human soul by doing these things, especially
Yes.
just going into nature.
Yes. The difficulty that I see in that is how do you get them to do that? Really?
Well, you don't. They have to want to. I mean, honestly, they
Right,
have
they
to
have to
want
want to, exactly, mhm.
to take
Yeah,
that step into nature and put down the phone for a while.
right. So, for a long time, the only way that women out here could communicate with town or anybody is to find the nearest payphone, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of women in their 20s right now probably wouldn't even know what a payphone is. But,
Yeah.
there's pictures in the archives at the University of Oregon that show women standing at a phone booth talking to whoever, but they
Yeah.
had to travel several miles to get to that phone. Now, most of the lands that I'm familiar with and acquainted with have infrastructure. They have electricity, they have running water, they have internet. Um, everybody has a cell phone and an email address. So it's easier now
Yeah,
and
that is important to say. Your land is super primitive, but a lot of the lands
are not.
have
Mhm.
what most people have now.
Right,
Internet access,
right.
phones,
Yep, yep.
electricity.
And an established garden. My land happened to be, like I said, the golden child, really, and kind of the latchkey kid that was left to fend for itself, and it's
Mm,
not developed. But women used to live here. My
mhm.
land is 50 years old. We celebrated her anniversary, I think last summer actually.
Yeah.
And in historical terms, our land is eligible to be on the National Historical List
Oh,
of
cool.
landmarks. There's certain parameters around that, um, and we are actually butted up against uh, Oregon State. What do they call themselves? Department of Forestry and
Mhm.
Parks and Rec. They maintain a historical ghost town right butted up right against our property.
Oh, interesting.
That's managed by Parks and Rec, and it's a historical landmark. It has old buildings, and oddly enough, not oddly enough, but interestingly enough, the the wood that was used to build those structures that are still existing at this ghost town came from the trees that were taken out of my canyon,
Yeah.
all in 1800 ish.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, and the other side of me is Bureau of Land Management land. So I don't have neighbors.
Yeah, we know, which is so cool because if you wanna really get away, it sounds like your place is an awesome place to really
Right.
get away?
Yes, and I have all kinds of spots where a person can pull in an RV, pitch a tent. We
Mhm.
have platforms where you can put your tent. We built a couple of micro shelters over the last 4 years. We have the ability to have water, which a couple of years ago we had to advertise that you had to bring your own water.
Mhm.
And that's always kind of the way it's been on our land. But we're building that infrastructure. We actually have Wi-Fi out there.
Oh.
I mean, that's like huge improvement. We can use
Yeah,
our
yeah.
cell phones inside the cabin, and the biggest reason for that was living so far back in the woods and so primitively. I was out there for months and months and months by myself, and if
Mhm.
anything were to happen to me, I would have to be able to get a hold of the outside world,
Yeah,
and I couldn't do that until we got Wi-Fi. And
yeah.
there's still spots on the land where it wouldn't even work anyway. But
Yeah, but at least you can get emergency services if you need
right.
it. Yeah.
And that was the big concern was, okay, what happens if I fall down? Not that, using a chainsaw and cut my leg off because that's like against the rules when I'm out there by myself. But if I were to be walking down a trail and nothing's flat, mind you,
Yeah.
Debbie broke her ankle just tripping on a rock out here because it
Oh,
was
no.
on the hill and so on. And, you know, it, it, things happen. So if
Yeah.
something were to happen to me, I would have to get a hold of somebody. They'd have to come in by helicopter, or I'd have to give them to the code of the gate, but at least they could get to me.
You know, another thing that I think is super important to acknowledge about lesbian lands and going there and hanging out and sometimes there's events you can go to and things like
Oh,
that.
absolutely.
Yeah, is that there is really something special about being around just women,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, as a woman, just being
Oh,
around
yeah.
women in women's spaces
And
with, you know.
lesbians in
Yeah,
specific.
and then if you wanna get more specific because there
Yeah.
are lots of women's land that is
Oh,
not
yeah.
lesbian specific necessarily, but
Right.
when you're on lesbian land with other lesbians, especially if it's intergenerational,
Mhm.
meaning, you know, you have a span of maybe, you know, 80 to 20,
Right, right,
you know,
exactly.
um, that's just such a really cool experience. You know, I've
Yes.
had that experience kind of about like once, and it was amazing. It was really amazing.
It's very cool. Every year now, Debbie and I are the new kids on the block. We've only been here coming on 5 years, and there's all kinds of women out here that have been here since their 20s, and they're 80 now. They've been here the whole time. They built their cabins, they put in their gardens, and now they're ready to just kick back and enjoy it. And so in the course of all of this, there has been established parties, and there's been established barbecues and dances and so on, and those things happen every year, and one of the biggest ones happens in July out here, and every single woman on the planet, just about, there's a limit, because the women that own the place, they, because of fire safety reasons, Southern Oregon's just as flammable as California is.
Yeah, yeah.
So they have to kind of put a limit on how many women show up, but it's a variety. There's all kinds of people that show up, all kinds of women that
Mhm.
show up, uh, and mostly lesbian. But
Yeah. I
it's open to it's open to that, and it happens every year, and it's a gigantic event that people plan on every year.
yeah.
You know,
I still think that it's very regardless of how accepting society has become with lesbians, you're still a minority, a
right?
a a significant minority,
Absolutely.
and you still get shit. Once in a
Mhm.
while, you'll still get shit. Like, you're still not the norm, right? You're still an
Right.
outsider to a certain extent,
Yep.
and there is something to be said about not being an outsider for a while
Mhm.
and, you know, hanging around a bunch of other lesbians that, you know,
Yep.
I think that's still important for the younger generation. Even if you are more widely accepted, I still think it's important. Also, what can you learn from all the other women around you? That's something that I'm very disappointed that we've lost is kind of the ability just and this is all of humans at this point, the ability to be with other people who are different ages and learn from them.
Mhm.
We just don't value that at all. We
Right.
value not to go on a tangent, but our society values the young and the
Right.
fucking stupid. I'm sorry. When you're
Yep, yep,
young, you're stupid. You just are. You haven't had the life experience.
and they can lead you by the nose.
Yeah, but you know what? They value the young and not the old, not
Yeah.
the women who have some experience. And I think that's so important also to, you know, open your ears once in a while and listen to other women's experiences, especially when they got 40, 50 years on you.
Right, exactly, and they're not stupid years either. These women have
No.
skills, and so
These women have done stuff I would
you're
never
right,
I would never even imagine doing. Like,
right.
seriously, you know?
So let me take you back to that same event that I just described. It's a yearly event. It's a 4-day campover. It involves a giant swimming hole and naked women everywhere, and in the beginning, it was the locals, the women that could get there by carpooling, or, and had to learn about it by telephone. But now it's such a big event that the women that own the land have to limit how many people are on there for fire safety reasons. And the crowd is all kinds and all ages.
Mhm.
And for a very prime example, on the first day, there's an gathering at the barn, and everybody gets welcomed, and one of the things that gets mentioned is the fire safety, okay? Because this happens the end of July-ish.
Yeah, big
So
fire season.
right, exactly, and most of the time, there's already an existing fire that we have to kinda watch out for. But what they're told is no smoking unless you're in the gravel parking lot. There's no open campfires. And one of the other things that women have to pay attention to is setting their glasses down in a spot where the sun refracts and can catch the grass on fire, or a drinking glass that is doesn't have a liquid in it and it's just sitting there with water or empty. The sun refracts through it and starts your tent on fire.
Mm.
Or you light a candle inside your tent and it catches your sleeping bag on fire. So all
Yeah,
this,
don't do that. Don't put candles in your
right.
tent.
But there are women that come to this event that wouldn't think about that.
True. I guess yes. I grew up pretty rough in the country.
Mhm.
I'm familiar with how things are supposed to work, but I forget if you were born and raised in the city, there's a lot you don't know about
Exactly, and fire
roughing it a
safety
little
is
bit.
one of
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Fire safety in the woods is one of them because most of the campsites that are available for this festival are in the woods,
Yeah.
under the trees. It just and it's surrounded by pasture land and mountains and,
Mhm.
not sagebrush, but, wild stuff,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it doesn't take much to light it all on fire, and they wouldn't think about that.
So if lesbians wanna come to the land, what do they is there a charge for it? Because you said they can camp there. Is there,
Mhm.
what do they need to know about the
So, traditionally, in the past, women that came to the lands pitched in monetarily or some type of chore to compensate for the groceries that they ate while they were there. If they didn't bring their own food, and whatever, if they ate from the common table, you pitch in a couple bucks to
Mhm,
pay for the groceries. Today, there's a few of the properties. There's one for positive that advertises as an Airbnb. They have an extra cabin they advertise as an Airbnb, so that's a charge, typical
mhm,
Airbnb charges. And it's separate from the landowner's cabin and property. It's out in the middle of the woods by itself, but it's an Airbnb. There's another property that has a cabin on their land that they rent out for people that are passing through or coming to an event or want to come visit and experience the rest of the lands around. And if they want to stay in this cabin, they pay a fee.
mhm.
But that's what it's about. And most of the time, women that come to camp, they come prepared. They come with their own food. They come with their own water in a lot of cases, especially to my land. But there are quite a number of the lands that they come and eat at the common table in a house that has electricity.
Yeah.
You
So
know,
it would depend on what land you're gonna go to.
oh,
So you would
absolutely,
just discuss that with the owners and
of the
yeah,
property.
because some places are just you can camp there, which means it's like any other campsite, right? You're responsible for your stuff, but there's other places where maybe that's not the case, and just be aware of that. But I want to point out that you know these women in the lands, these women are very gracious with
Absolutely.
their property, with their things, right?
Hmm.
So it's very important that you do have to, and most of them, these aren't rich women, okay? That this
Nope.
they're just living off the land for the most part,
Yep.
and
They've
didn't
made
start
their
out with
way.
wealth.
Hmm.
So it's important to give something. It's important to give
Absolutely.
something. Either your time, your muscles, your work, your
Mhm.
brains, some
Yep.
money, whatever.
Whatever. Exactly. And that's where coming to my land and helping out, carry a
Yeah.
couple of different landscape rocks or move something or another or move it, whatever it is.
So like if some lesbians were, taking a road trip, say they're taking a road trip through the state of of Oregon. Could they like decide to stay at some of these places as a replacement for a hotel?
Absolutely,
Ah,
but
that's cool.
you have to get a hold of us first.
I know, I know.
Make a reservation, quote unquote.
Yeah,
Absolutely. We all welcome that. Every one of us.
yeah. And if
Everyone.
I've also heard of women, I think I knew a lesbian who went and lived on one of the lands for a year or so.
Yes, that happens too.
Yeah, there can be agreement to go and
Mhm.
live there and help out and stuff, which is kinda
Yes.
cool.
So there's a a property north of us that was established a long time ago, and the woman her and her partner are older matriarchs of our community, and they have graduated from the original cabin, one room cabin that they built when they first found the land. They've graduated to their own hand built home
Mhm.
with electricity and running water, and it's beautiful. But
Mm.
there's still the original cabin that they maintain, and that when there's women passing through, they can stay in that cabin, and they can stay for an extended period of time as a student or
Mhm.
as a traveler. There's also, we know a lot of women, there's a fairly sizable community of nomads that come into the lands during the summer and park their vans, and they stay a couple of weeks with one group, and they go to the next land and they stay a couple of weeks there. It's all one big, it's a beautiful family is what it is, and we for the most part are very welcoming to anybody that I mean, every land has their own parameters. uh,
True, so you have to talk to the owner about everything. Basically,
about all of
don't
it.
assume something's gonna
Assume
go.
nothing.
Yeah.
Right. And when it comes to designations of lesbian women versus heterosexual women for a word, as far as I know, for the women that I am friends with on the lands that they own, women, female born females are welcome.
Okay, yeah,
Everything else is conditional. I mean, it really is conditional.
yeah.
And as long as a person adheres to the rules, for instance, on my land, men can come and stay the day. Mostly they come as workers. But my partner has adult sons, and they can come and visit us during the day. They cannot sleep overnight there.
Mhm.
They have to go somewhere else to sleep.
Okay. That's a rule that's specific to your property. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
And, long time ago in the 70s, one of the big things around, especially lesbian separatists, is there was huge controversy on allowing male children on the lands.
Mm,
It was a big controversy, and some of the lands had an age limit, and some of the lands said absolutely not. But it was a big deal, and it's not necessarily as big a deal with the women that I know, but several of them have male grandchildren, and they come visit with their heterosexual moms who are daughters of the women that own the land. So it's
yeah.
very conditional.
That's good to know. Thanks for letting us know. And basically the main takeaway here is if you want to go to one of these lands, you got to talk to the owner and you
Mhm.
got to, make sure you know what the rules are with the land, with everything.
Absolutely. That's just courtesy, standard courtesy. You don't, and
It
one
is
of the
courtesy, but it has to be stated.
oh, yeah, don't assume anything, because otherwise you're setting yourself up for somebody doing something that you don't approve of, and that's
Yeah.
not okay either way. It just really
So
isn't.
I'm going to get these questions. As I'm going to get this big question.
Okay.
How from lesbians who listen. Well, how do I find out where do I get the information to know where these lands are? How do I make contact?
Okay. Um, most of the people that listen to your podcast are, first off, women, mostly lesbian, and I'm
Mhm.
gonna go with that. There are many publications, periodicals, And one of them is called the Maze Directory,
Okay.
Maize. The Maze Directory is goes out every couple of years with an entire listing of all the women's lands throughout the United States and a few in Europe.
It's a cool publication.
Yes.
I get it. It's
And if you want to go visit a land, like I'm in there, my
mhm.
land is in there with instructions on how to contact me.
Okay.
And there's also another publication, and the acronym, I'm just going to use the acronym because this is a public space. And it's a very lesbian oriented, very lesbian only publication. LC has been around for 50 years,
Mhm.
still going strong. And there's a list in LC that is called Contact Dyke List. And you can find lesbian lands in there too because they advertise.
Yeah. Really, the takeaway here, lesbians who wanna, get in on this is if you really wanna find them, you can. Just start
Yes,
looking.
absolutely.
I don't need to open the door for you. You can find the door.
That's kind of been the standing rule because all those years ago, safety was imperative, and it still is.
Exactly. It still is. You don't that's something to really keep in mind and to be respectful of is that, these women don't want to be super public. They don't want everybody on the whole internet to know exactly where they live because that's dangerous.
Yes,
Who would want anyone to know exactly where they lived? Like, you know.
exactly.
So, caution is important, respect is important.
Absolutely. Mhm. And to respect that is important too. I mean, we've had instances where it was not respected, and
Mhm.
those particular individuals have been told not to ever come back.
Respect the rules too. If it's not for you, fine, that's great. It's not for you, move along. There's lots of stuff's not for me.
Right. So, on my land in specific, Debbie and I have come up with our parameters because once we took over the land, we could make our own rules. And that's one of the beauties of being owners because we can make up the rules. If it's an intentional communal setting, then it's by consensus. And there is a land out here still that runs their daily workings on a consensus of five. And the five
Mhm.
women have to be women that have lived on that land for a year or more.
Mhm.
And they have to by consensus. And I'm impressed that it still survives that way because most of the intentional communities have not they've basically failed because it's got like herding lesbian cats, in some instances. So being owners is more there's more control.
Mhm.
So what we decided, because Debbie and I are more LGBT than a lot of the lands out here, they're still a little bit on the old-fashioned traditional side. We have decided that we're open for venues that are prearranged, and if it's a lesbian-only event, that's who's there.
Mhm.
If it's a women-only event, it's open to all women,
Mhm.
female-born women.
Mhm.
If it's a gay event, gay men, it's their venue. That's who's there. And if lesbians want to come, great. And if they don't like the fact that it's gay men, then they can go somewhere else.
Mhm.
And if it's a trans event, then that is who is there.
Fair.
And if somebody doesn't like it, they can go find another place to hang out.
Very fair.
So it's very specific.
Mhm.
Ultimately speaking, my land is lesbian only.
Mhm.
Female born women who are lesbian and who use the word.
Well, good, that's a little bit of a side note, but why is using that word important to you, at least? From
Preservation
you.
preservation of the lesbian culture.
Ah, yeah.
Lesbian, there is nothing wrong with calling. I'm very proud to be a lesbian. I have always called myself a lesbian. there's a lot of young women out there today that think lesbian is transphobic. And I just
Well,
threw
and
that in
also
there.
there's a
But
lot of there's a lot of women who, even in my generation, like when I came out in 99,
mhm,
2000, lesbian was not used.
right.
Gay,
Yep.
right? Because and for me, from my personal experience, lesbian was like it made me cringe. I would
Mhm,
never say it, right? And
right.
but I never
Exactly.
asked why. Why? You
I
know?
don't
Now I use it.
know.
And I use it because of that. I use it because it's important. I think we're on the same page with that one.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, lesbian is very specific. It's not a bad word. It's a great word and it's you should celebrate it every day.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of younger generation that don't.
Yeah.
They don't, they won't, they poo-poo it. And personally, I don't like the word queer used on me.
Oh, me neither. No, because I mean,
That
what
word is bad as far as I'm concerned.
same.
The younger generation use it as an umbrella term. Well, I don't live under an umbrella. I don't.
I like it. I like it.
I live under the trees, and
Yeah.
my trees have been lesbian experience for 50 years, and I don't plan on changing that. I want young lesbian women to really consider finding us and coming
Mhm.
out and having it just a day trip. Get out of the city, like you said, touch the grass, come and
Mhm.
see what it's like to smell the trees and, drink water that's unfiltered and not acidified.
That's
So,
kinda
yeah,
your mission.
yeah, that
That's
is
your
my
mission?
mission. Yeah, my mission is to, um, allow the younger generation to come see what it's all about, and hopefully, um, Oregon Women's Land Trust has several lands that need stewards, and maybe one of the women that come out here and experience this might be interested, and that's the hope.
This is very important part of lesbian culture and lesbian history.
It
And
is
thank you so much for coming on the podcast and talking to me about this part of our history.
absolutely no problem. I've been looking forward to it.